Marie-Louise von Franz, a brilliant Swiss psychologist, spent a lifetime peering into the deepest, darkest, and most luminous corners of the human psyche. She worked side by side with Carl Jung for nearly 3 decades, from 1933 until his passing in 1961. During those years, she developed a fascination with fairy tales, those strange, simple stories we tell children, which often hold more truth than the heaviest academic tomes. Jung, who understood these stories as the fundamental anatomy of the human soul, once famously told her that when you study fairy tales, you can study the anatomy of man. After years of interpreting these myths from every corner of the globe and every era of human history, von Franz arrived at a discovery that initially disappointed her. She had been searching for a single, universal message, a master key to moral conduct. Instead, she found the rule of contradiction. In the world of fairy tales, she realized, almost every lesson has an equal and opposite counterpart. Some stories tell you that when you encounter evil, you must stand your ground and fight it to the death. Others tell you that to fight evil is a fool's errand, and the only path to survival is to run away, hide, and live to see another day. Some say you must suffer in silence without striking back. Others warn that to be a doormat is a betrayal of your own worth. There are stories that suggest, when faced with the devil, you should outwit him with a clever lie. Others insist that you must remain strictly, painfully honest, even to the darkest forces. At first, this felt like chaos. How could there be no indisputable truth? But after deep reflection, von Franz realized that this contradiction was not a mistake. It was the entire point. The dilemmas of life are not rigid. No single path is right for everyone, and no static moral code can cover the infinite complexity of human experience. It is precisely in the tension between these contradictory ways of living that we are forced to choose. And in the act of choosing, we become individuals. There would be no such thing as an individual if the basic material of life were not contradictory. If the path were always clear, we would just be followers of a collective rulebook. But because life is ambiguous, we are tasked with building a responsible, free consciousness that sits above the opposites. We can recognize that it would be right to do one thing and right to do the exact opposite. And then, in that space of uncertainty, we choose the third thing. We choose our own path. However, amidst this tangled web of contradictions, von Franz discovered one single, striking exception, one rule that no fairy tale, from no culture, ever dared to break. That rule is simple. One must never, under any circumstance, hurt the helpful animal. In the language of the psyche, this helpful animal represents our intuitive inner voice, that primal, instinctual guidance that helps us distinguish between right and wrong. It is the part of us that nudges us towards certain paths and pulls us away from others, often long before our rational minds have even started to process the decision. This is not about logic. It is about obedience to one's most basic inner being. In all the nations and all the myths von Franz studied, she never once found a story that suggested we should ignore that inner animal. To ignore that voice is to ignore your conscience, and as Carl Jung noted, conscience is not just a moral feeling, it is a special form of knowledge. It is a certainty about the emotional value of the motives behind our actions. When you stand before a life-changing decision, your conscience manifests as a gut feeling, a physical tension, or a sudden, quiet clarity. It is the knowledge of whether your actions are aligned with your soul or whether they are simply a performance for the gallery. Obeying this inner voice is easy when it aligns with your family, your peers, and the laws of your society. But the true test of character comes when your conscience tells you to move in a direction that your society forbids. This is the moment of the greatest dilemma. Do you obey the inner voice, even at the risk of going astray, or do you conform to the moral code of your surroundings? Most people are terrified of going against the social grain. They choose the path of least resistance. they conform. But when we deny that inner voice, we are left with a nagging, hollow feeling that we are living a lie. Even if you manage to deceive everyone around you, even if you win the applause of the crowd and satisfy the moral code of your culture, deep down, you hear the whisper. You know when something is not right. This sickness of the self, this guilt, regret, and the feeling that you are an imposter in your own life, is exactly what the great novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky warned about. He saw the conscience as a natural, instinctive regulator of the human psyche. If you distort or pervert it for too long, you end up in a literal sickness of the soul. But here, we must tread carefully. Jung offered a word of caution. Our demons can be master manipulators. Beside the right conscience, the one that prompts us to grow and integrate, there stands a false conscience. This false voice exaggerates, perverts, and twists things. It turns evil into good and good into evil, and it does so with the same compulsive urgency as the real thing. It is the tempter, the seducer, the voice of the ego masquerading as the voice of the soul. So how do we tell the difference? Jung's advice was simple, yet incredibly difficult. All haste is of the devil. When you feel a compulsive, frantic urge to act, when you feel the pressure to make a decision immediately, stop. If you stew in the agony of the conflict long enough, if you allow the doubt to sit, an inner line eventually becomes clear. This development provides enough certainty to continue, even if there is a risk of error. You have to slow down. You have to endure the discomfort of not knowing. In practice, there is no exact manual to indicate where the right conscience ends and the false one begins. We have to take a leap of faith. We have to trust that our commitment to that inner contract, our contract with life itself, has higher authority than any external rule. Some may wonder if it is worth the cost. Is it worth being ostracized? Is it worth the enmity of neighbors? The writer Laurens van der Post, deeply influenced by Jung, captured the answer perfectly. He suggested that every human being has a special contract with life. While we have a contract with our community, that is secondary. The primary contract is between you and existence itself. No human being can refuse to obey that inner voice and ever know a moment of true peace again. The unease you feel when you break your contract with society is a small price to pay, a peace that passes all understanding in comparison to the devastation of breaking your contract with yourself. When you follow your conscience, you aren't just following a rule, you are finally, after all the noise of the world has settled, becoming who you were meant to be. Thank you so much for joining me in this reflection on A Patient Mind. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing as we continue to explore the architecture of the human experience. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your inner voice and the expectations of those around you? I'll see you in the next video.